Hello again, Chris Lee of Southeastern 16 here to talk South Carolina football. What a run it has been for the Gamecocks. Chris Clark, one of the best in the business at covering South Carolina. Chris, thanks for joining us as Shane Beamer just does what Shane Beamer does in November every year. I don't know why more people haven't figured this out, why people count them out, but what is it about? First of all, welcome. Second, what is
Big
it about
problem.
this team under Shane Beamer every year we start to see this?
It was really funny, man, on the Insiders Forum, which is our premium message board on Gamecock Central. And this wasn't even after the Missouri game. It was maybe after, I can't remember if it was after Oklahoma, after Vandy, one of those games. And somebody started a thread and said, guys, in the future, could we maybe let a season play out?
Yeah.
And, it's like, that's funny. And the answer is actually no, because it's college football, right? So
Right.
it's going to be week to week. After the first game of the season, there was a lot of anticipation of rebounding from a 5-7 year, a lot of new faces, Rocket Sanders coming in, new quarterback, retooled defense, all those things. And they didn't look very good against Old Dominion. And people are already, amazingly, Chris, we live in a microwave society, but literally people, I don't know if LaNorris Sellers is a quarterback or our quarterback. Those people have since crawled into a hole, of course, but we see why, right? When you play, you know this, Chris, you cover the SEC, you've covered the SEC a long time. The league's never been better. I mean, it is an absolute grind every week, and always has been, but this year even more. I think just a grind, and so you got to kind of let a season play out. This team is playing its best ball now going into November. And I think, I'll try to actually answer your question. I'm not really sure of what Shane Beamer has, other than he has a belief that, and I don't mean this in a negative way, he has at times an almost irrational belief, right, in himself, his team. And he's really good at continuing to keep his team motivated. There's so many examples of that. And it is funny to think about it because, every single year since he's been here, there's been a point where, whether it's regional, national, or even local people, even parts of the fan base, have given up. And he just constantly proves, no, we're not dead, right? 2021, 2022 Florida game, one of the worst performances I've ever seen from a South Carolina team. Next week, Tennessee comes to town. There's a sense of dread. Score 63 points and win. Last year had a chance to get to a bowl after a terrible October. This year, Old Dominion, very up and down, right? And now you've won 4 straight games, and you've got an opportunity to, close this thing out really strong. You got an opportunity to go get double-digit wins. So I think it's just he doesn't ever give up. He gives his team his culture, right? And I think just being consistent, keeping guys engaged. I think having a veteran team this year has really helped with that. There are a lot of different things, but it's one of his strengths for sure.
Yo said he almost has to be irrational. I think you
Yeah.
hit on something. Like, I think if you're Georgia or Alabama or LSU, you don't have to be. If you're one of those other teams, and South Carolina certainly, no offense, it fits into that other part.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're dead on, and it works for him. Like, Shane Beamer makes his brand work, and I think one thing that I always look for: do you keep your kids engaged late in the season?
Yeah.
Because you see it happen somewhere when you really don't have as much to play for. To me, I think his ability to do that year in and year out speaks as highly of his coaching and who he is as anything.
Yeah, if there's ever been questions along, will Beamer lose the locker room? Has he lost the locker room? And the answer is just no. I mean, it doesn't, right? And that doesn't mean there's no hard moments. I mean, it's a football program. It's a family. You've got 100 and something kids on the team. You've got coaches. You've got support. Like, things are hard, right? Even when things are going well, things can be very hard within that structure. But yeah, I think to build a program like South Carolina, it's a very unique situation with Shane Beamer in South Carolina. He's born in Charleston. this was his dream job. And some people may roll their eyes at that. How can South Carolina be it? But it was. You may call that silly, irrational, whatever. This was the job that Shane Beamer wanted. He wanted it over Virginia Tech. He wanted it over, pick your name brand school. Like, this is the job he wants. This was a home for him. Was an assistant under Steve Spurrier. And so you can kind of tell with how he runs his program. Now, you still got to recruit great players, which they've done, right? You look at this team this year, they aren't doing this just on culture. They aren't doing this just on belief. Those things are important, but you need a good roster, and they have that, right? You need a really good quarterback, which they've gotten increasingly with the emergence of LaNorris Sellers. You need a really good defensive line. They have that. You need depth. They have more of that than they had last year, certainly. You need a really good back, which you have in Rocket Sanders. You need the whole everything, right? And so I think when you look at this season, like, we know Beamer can keep his team engaged, but just from this season, how have they improved? They got most of their key guys back. They added some big pieces from the portal. They have an uber talented young quarterback. And I think, all the players and coaches deserve, kudos for what they've done. But to build a program, Chris, like South Carolina, you're right. It's not a plug and play like a Georgia, like a Bama, where even if you go have a down year, you can step right back in. You have to do things a little bit differently and kind of carve out a niche, and that's what he's done.
Yeah, just to offer a receipt. Chris and I have been friends for a long time. I remember having a conversation with you, and then I got to give a word for a sponsor here. Back in, I don't know, right before he took the job, a couple months, you saying this is the job Shane Beamer wants, and I think some coaching dominoes are going to fall from there. Before you answer, got to get this in. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL to UFC, and MMA. Head to BetOnline today. Get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. But yeah, just to verify, I remember you telling me this is the job that Shane Beamer wants. And I do think in a world where everything feels transactional between players and coaches and whatever, and my love for you today can be my love for somebody else tomorrow if the price is right. He does have an affinity for that place, and you can see it in everything that he does.
Yeah, no doubt. And that does count, right? Now,
yeah,
at the end, it's kind of like in recruiting, Chris, where you hear sometimes in recruiting, coaches will say things like, we want guys who will be here, who want to be here. That's great up to a point. That is a great trait to have. But at the end of the day, if you took 25, 30 guys that just want to be there that aren't very good, you aren't going to be very good. So you do have to pick. You got to have a guy who wants to be there, who is also good, right? And look, I mean, Shane Beamer, it hasn't been a perfect tenure. No, there have been ups, there have been downs. But when you start in his almost 4 years now, started in first season was 2021, obviously, he's starting to accumulate some accomplishments that are along the lines or better of what some of his predecessors have done quickly, right? And so, look, I think Gamecock fans have always been hungry for a coach that, two very successful coaches who were on the tail end of their career came here, and Lou Holtz and Steve Spurrier, and they embraced this place, right? And the fans embraced them. But Shane Beamer is just different. Fans, I think, have always wanted a guy who wanted to be here and wanted to stay. And so I think a lot of people feel like, of course, it has to go well, but when you see the trajectory, people are feeling good now. And I think a lot of people want to throw resources behind a coach who not only wants to be here, but wants to stay in Columbia.
Yeah. I've been trying to speak this into existence for a while. I think I'm finally getting traction.
Okay.
For a little bit. South Carolina is a playoff team. I think last week ESPN had it as like less than 1% chance. I think I've seen some people that had them eliminated. I'm looking on FPI right now. It says they've got a 9% chance to make the playoff. I saw an article that referred to ESPN's FPI, and South Carolina having, I think, I don't know, a 12% chance. I'm not sure where, am I missing something here? I think the chance rises to about a third if they went out against Wofford and Clemson. How much does this feel like a thing in and around that program that the playoffs might be a possibility?
Well, it's a conversation. I think most people recognize that it's still in the longer shot category, in that obviously, and let's just say this once, they have to win out, obviously. Yeah. So everything we're going to say and talk about is based on that fact. But you're right. I mean, all the computers, the metrics, like I've been following the college football all-state playoff predictor on ESPN. And it's interesting. Even though South Carolina has moved up in the actual college football playoff rankings, they have gone down in that playoff predictor. I think they were 14% 2 weeks ago. They're 13% before Tuesday night's rankings, and now they're at 9%. Actually, the same percentage as UNLV, which, but whatever. Yeah. Here's the point. There's been so much talk since the rankings were released. South Carolina needs a lot of help, and it's hard to figure out like what kind of help. You know what I mean? Because if you go, all right, well, you need like Texas, who the committee apparently is in absolute love with.
Yes.
For reasons that I'm not quite sure of. Good team. Best win is at Vandy by 3. Have a loss, and strength of schedule in terms of SEC teams quite low. Committee loves them, right? So on one hand, if you're South Carolina, you're going, well, we need Kentucky to beat Texas, right, this weekend. Or we need A&M to beat Texas, maybe both. But then if, let's say A&M beats Texas, Kentucky beats Texas, what does that do for the rest of the conference? And you just got kind of this whole domino effect, right? It's hard to tell what the committee's looking at. Yeah. I do think, Chris, it looks like, and how that target will move each week. It looks like the committee is not factoring in strength of schedule as much, right? So take Georgia, right? Their strength of schedule metrics, their quality wins, their quality losses are, arguably the best in the country. But because they have 2 losses, and say Texas has 1, Texas is higher. Indiana, Penn State, right? Penn State has 1 loss, didn't get in the end zone, right, against Ohio State, but they have 1 loss. And so for South Carolina, I actually think that's kind of a bad sign, right? Yeah. Because you're not a 2-loss team. Georgia's got 2 losses. They played a very hard schedule. They're sitting there at number 10, kind of getting in by the skin of their teeth. The Gamecocks, on the other hand, have 3 losses, right? So I think you're going to need some type of maximum chaos. Like you need Notre Dame to lose a couple games, lose their last 2 games of the season, at least 1. You need more SEC chaos, right? You need Texas to maybe get knocked out and then go from there. I don't know. What do you think? Like, what's the path you see? Because you've been trying to speak it into existence.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, hey, here goes. I just cost you another 10 minutes of your day. I've got this model I've made, and excuse the rambling, but it'll kind of make sense. And because like I always want to know, like, how much does like look test matter? Like, how good do we think this team is? And that throw the records out. Like if you played Alabama and Georgia, or pick any 2 teams, what would it look like if they played on a neutral field? So I've got this model I've made where I'm using like 5 different ratings, and it's stuff that most people have heard of. It's like FPI, and I've taken Sagarin, and I've just distilled it all to a number. How many points above or below are you average? And then let's power rank all the teams. Let's spit it out there. What do they rank them? And I think I've got Carolina. Let me pull this up. Because I think people, and again, bear with me, I think people will kind of find this interesting. Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying. What I like to try to quantify things. In other words, it's 2 guys talking. I can say, well, I think South Carolina ought to be in, And people just say, well, of course he will. He's an SEC guy. But I like to see like what's actually behind an argument. Okay, South Carolina, if you just power rank the teams right now, according to what I've got, is 12th nationally, sandwiched right between Indiana and Clemson. 15.8 points above average, actually 2 points behind Indiana. So there's a little bit of a gap there. And I think Indiana, people have picked on Indiana a little bit just to prove I can be fair, because I think that's a really good team. All right, yeah. The other component of it, I would call it, it's kind of like an electoral vote system. Mm-hmm. You take all the teams in the country from worst, which right now is Kent State, to best, which in the power rankings, it's kind of like what they do with the net. And I think the best, I think Alabama and Ohio State are like, a millimeter apart. And so there's like a 58-point difference between the top and the bottom. So if you beat somebody, and if it's Kent State, which they're the worst team in the country, and you beat them, you get a point, right? And by the way, this system should hurt the SEC, and this is what makes it interesting. If you win a game against anybody, you get at least a point. And if you beat Alabama, you get like 58 points, and then you add or subtract 2.5 points for home field. Okay, so I did that, and I did that with every team in the playoff contention. And if you lose a game, it doesn't matter if you lose a game at Georgia in triple overtime on the last play of the game. It's a -1. And then how bad the loss is goes from there. So, like, if you're Notre Dame, you lose to Northern Illinois, that's a bad loss.
Right.
And you take what you got in the wins and what you've got in the losses. South Carolina right now is probably not a playoff team based on that, but they're close, right? And then you start adding in the resume, and the resume is close. And then you blend them together, and I just did 60-40. Like, resume 60% and power rankings are 40%, and they're 14. So they're right there. Now here's the problem with all that. That's me trying to figure it out fairly and rationally. Yeah. I'm glad you laughed, because I think you see where this is going.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to put the committee on blast, okay? But I try to do this in like, how do I have a rational opinion and how do I back it up? I hear them talk, and it feels to me like we've got our answers and we'll just backfit them.
Yes.
And it feels like one of the hills that they are dying on, either out of principle or out of this makes our system work, is it feels like you get one loss for free. And it doesn't matter if it's Northern Illinois. It doesn't matter if it's at Texas.
Yep.
And those are the rules. Because I think if I were – here's the top 15 mine spit out. If I do it 60-40 and resume 60%, it goes like this. It goes Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame, Indiana, Ole Miss, Miami, Tennessee, BYU. I think people laughing at BYU are missing. They've won a lot of good games. And then SMU and South Carolina. And oh, by the way, you beat Clemson, and you might move up a spot or two. So to me, they are already, to me, they should be on the fringe of the discussion. And we just went through this whole thing where we're talking about their playoff chances. I don't think any of this matters. I think the committee has sort of figured out what they're going to do. To me, they planted a flag on the Big Ten when the first week they said, here's your top 5. There's 4 Big Ten teams in there. There was no rhyme or reason to it. I think to me that gave the Big Ten a margin for error, to where now if Indiana loses a game or Ohio State loses another one, well, we dropped them, but we didn't drop them all the way out. To me, that was really suspicious. I don't think ultimately it is probably going to matter. And then we've just gone through the percentages. I don't really believe them, because I don't think the committee is going to go there. And I think these percentages are probably based on should be's and historicals, but I think the committee's got other ideas. But the point I'm trying to make is I do think they are a legit playoff contender. I just think that you listen to the committee talk and you watch what it's doing. I think they could beat Clemson by 50, and it's not going to matter. Maybe I'm wrong, but
well, and that's why I feel. I mean, you can look at some of the signs, and I think it would almost have to be. So one of the things that Ward Manuel, the chair, said on Tuesday night was, he gave what the criteria are. Now, of course, we know the criteria kind of insert
Change.
criteria to fit whatever you're saying. But they are leaning heavily on they're saying eye test, watching the games. But, so on one hand, you've got a team like Indiana who hasn't lost. They have looked very good. They are a good team, right? They've looked very good, but they haven't played anybody. And it's like, if you're watching, Kirby Smart put it well, the greatest measure of how you play is where you're playing and who you're playing.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're playing, Kent State, like you said, if you're playing Kent State at home versus playing, Georgia on the road, big difference.
Yeah.
Big difference. Right. And so there's just a lot of contradictions. Now, some of them are because this is a hard job. You've got the SEC on one hand has the most 2-loss teams in the top of the rankings. At the same time, it seems like the SEC is being penalized somewhat for being so good. But then another contradiction, you have Texas super high when, again, their best win's Vandy, and Vandy's a good team, right? But that is their best win.
Yeah.
Texas, to some degree, has played the schedule in front of them, and they have won except for a loss to Georgia, but they haven't played anybody. To me, Texas got in because they had a lot of preseason hype. Their name's Texas. They've largely taken care of business. And so you look at them and go, well, they got one loss. They're Texas. Their only loss was to Georgia, who's also good. Let's put them up there. So to me, Chris, if it gets to the point where South Carolina wins out and there's ample other chaos, which we can't really define, we just know there needs to be some kind of chaos.
Yeah.
We'll know it when we see it. If it gets to that point, then I think it has to be the committee uses their quote unquote eye test to then look at South Carolina and say, they won 6 straight games. They didn't have their quarterback against LSU for a half. They kind of got hosed out of that LSU game. The other loss was to, you got a loss on the road to Bama early in the season by 2. Right. And then your other loss was to Ole Miss, who's probably a playoff team. They got beat pretty soundly. Right. So it's hard to tell, but I think it's going to have to take the committee honestly kind of coming off of their criteria and leaning into the eye test in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're giving the committee too much credit right now, just having this discussion, because they don't think of, and again, I'm not here to bash the committee, but when you've got a job to do and you're putting stuff out there, and so much hinges on this, you got to do a better job. And also, just as a separate, I don't think you need to be having, ADs of schools that have got their in conferences a team. I mean, why do we have ADs or people involved currently in athletics at any level doing this? And that goes beyond football. I mean, we could get in a whole rant about this, but I'm not going to do it. But just as kind of an aside, I'm just going to take Georgia and Alabama as an example. And you can look at the wins they've got, and you can look at the wins Notre Dame's got. If we're going to I think the way they use losses to me is problematic, because I think you've got Georgia and Alabama. You look at any reputable computer ranking out there, they're both going to be ranked a little bit ahead of Notre Dame or really close. What would you rather have on your resume? Would you rather have a home loss to Northern Illinois, or would you rather, in the case of Georgia, have lost at Alabama and Ole Miss?
Yeah.
If you're Georgia, your losses are hang on a minute. I've seen so many games this year, my brain is mush. Your losses are at Alabama and at Ole Miss. Georgia and Alabama's are at Vandy and Tennessee. Would you rather have those 2 losses in any case of either team, or would you, especially Georgia, or would you rather have Notre Dame's home loss to Northern Illinois? I don't think it's close. And the wins are better for both those SEC teams. That to me is proof they're not really thinking this through.
Well, and
it's really going to hurt South Carolina, because if you think 2 losses are bad, what happens when you get a third? And to them, I don't think circumstances or anything seem to matter.
And there was a little controversy. South Carolina at one point, LSU obviously eliminated themselves and are totally out of the rankings when they got their 4th loss. But at one point you had 2 teams in LSU and South Carolina that both had 3 losses. South Carolina was ranked a spot ahead of LSU. So people are going, wait a minute, head to head.
Yep.
Right. Because you said, Ward Manuel, that's one of your criteria. And whether or not you agree with this, just saying, he mentioned, hey, those teams have gone in 2 different directions. Right.
Yeah.
So now, if you're sitting there looking at, okay, Texas, which they just said last night, has one of the best passing offenses in the country, which maybe that's true by the numbers, but they were not very impressive against Arkansas, right?
Yeah.
Scored 20 points. I think they had less than 200 passing yards. And then you look at a team like Georgia and how they play, right? So, like, are you looking at trajectory? Are you not?
Yeah.
Does it depend on the team? Does it depend on the week? It is very, very subjective to where, and to your point, the people involved, it is just so hard to predict. And it is kind of like just using these different criteria, or these different things to kind of fit into whatever box they kind of want to.
Well, and if I were them, I would have never said head to head, or I would have said in certain circumstances, because right now you tie yourself in knots. Tennessee people are screaming, well, wait a minute, we beat Alabama.
Yeah.
Why aren't we ahead out? Well, the problem is you're not comparing Tennessee and Alabama in a vacuum. You're comparing them against, 133 other teams, if you want to be technical. I mean, and at this point, a couple of dozen, but I digress. All right, let's talk about fun stuff. LaNorris Sellers. Holy cow, that kid's gotten so much better. What's going on there?
Yeah. I was talking to Charles. We were talking, Wes and I, on our podcast, to Charles Power from On 3, and Charles was the first guy, to his credit, in the recruiting industry to rank LaNorris Sellers as a 4-star. This is when he was still committed to Syracuse. He ended up, and a couple other services ended up with LaNorris as a 4-star later, but Charles put him in the top 100 of the 2024 or 2023 class, and actually said that if he were in a different class, he probably would have been a 5-star.
Wow.
And, Chris, everybody that saw this kid play in high school, and I was among them, just said, like, he just is special, right? And it was kind of bizarre how relatively under-recruited he went, right? I mean, at one point, he was committed to Virginia. He's committed to Syracuse. It's not like he had Ohio State and Georgia and all these different schools beating down his door. Now they're like, oh, maybe we should have looked at this kid. But, he just had every single tool: size, athleticism, can throw it, homegrown kid, great leader, great demeanor, insane, uncanny strength, gets better, right? That's something Charles pointed out. He said, you don't see a lot of quarterbacks get better from, like, a lot of them look great in camp. Sellers gets way better when he's in pads, can play his game, and got better during his senior year. Like you saw from even beginning of senior year to end of senior year, there was a progression. And so it was really, a lot of people accused us of overhyping him because of some of his struggles early in the season. But we tried to say, look, this kid has incredible talent, but there will be a learning curve. I'll admit that learning curve was maybe a little bit greater in a couple areas. One of them was field vision, right? Taking too many sacks early in the year. And then obviously the turnovers, the ball security, the fumbles. But those are things you can correct as a young player, and he has. He's gotten a lot better with pocket presence. He's evading even more people, than he was early in the year. He's done a better job with ball security and taking care of the football. And then he's like gone to the next level in terms of his playmaking ability. So, and Chris, the thing is, like, it wasn't just my opinion or Wes or Charles Power. Like, people who have been around college football for a long time, who have seen this kid practice last year during his redshirt year, saw him in spring ball or summer or preseason camp this year, put his name in the category from a talent standpoint as some of the big timers in college football history. And so we're starting to see that more and more. You got to give quarterbacks time to develop. You got to give young players time to develop. And he has done that.
Well, I'm watching him play, and I'm thinking, man, if this kid hit the portal, he's going to have a lot of 7-figure offers. And easy. I mean, just that's the reality. And I'm listening to what you're saying about him in high school, I don't know what level Florence High School played at or plays at. I'm sure you can fill me in, but the high school stats, I'm just pulling up his bio, 45 touchdowns, 2 picks, throws for 3,000 yards almost, 12 yards a throw, rushes for 1,338, like in 7 scores. Like, was he playing me and you and people didn't take it seriously? And then he wins the Shrine Bowl MVP. I mean, that's a lot of hardware for a high school kid.
Yeah, state title. No, he played 4A ball. So, we go up to 5A in South Carolina. So he's playing, he's playing good competition. I saw actually when LaNorris was I want to say, would he have been a sophomore or a junior? South Florence came to Irmo and played. So Nicky Minwari was on that defense. And that was the first time I'd seen LaNorris Sellers play. And I think they won that game. I think they put up 60 in that game, something like that. And I was like, okay, I think at the time LaNorris was committed to Virginia, and I started paying attention after that. And South Carolina, to their credit, stayed on him and won that recruitment. But he, you could just see, I mean, every coach who played against him, it kind of reminded me like Debo Samuel was under recruited in high school. Yeah. Every high school coach I talked to that played against him were like, that guy's a nightmare, and that's when to me, that a guy's got a chance. But again, he checks all the boxes that you would want. If you're kind of lab growing an ideal quarterback, he's got all those tools, and he's just needed some time to progress, and he's getting better every week, I think.
Yeah, I didn't realize, like, in high school, I think the composite, he's probably in the 220s. He's a 3-star. I mean, there are quarterbacks like that all the time that wash out and you never hear from again. Probably for every, one that makes it in that range, there are at least half a dozen that don't. But the stats scream he was probably a little bit underrated from what we just – but I think what got my attention was the way that Shane Beamer talked about him in the preseason. I'm like, all right, we know he's big. We know he's athletic. And if Beamer's got the kind of faith in him to where he's basically giving him the job – and I know Robbie Ashford's not a superstar, but he's played ball, which counts for something. That was kind of the first thing that got my attention, because I think with a lot of guys at this level, it's that between the ears part. And I'm like, okay – the way they're talking about this kid, that suggests to me that part is probably not going to be an issue.
Yeah, it's not in terms of, I think he stepped up his leadership in the offseason, just the way that South Carolina structured their lifts. They had the whole offense lift and work out together this year. That was a change they made. Whole offense, whole defense. LaNorris is in there, leading the cadences. Dowell Loggins, their offensive coordinator, mentioned a quote one time, and some people took it a little bit too literally, Chris, but it was, he doesn't make the same mistake twice. And so at one point during the season, when people are saying, well, why does he keep fumbling? It's like, well, it's not a literal, completely 100% statement, but it is. Now you're seeing it. Now people aren't talking about any of that anymore. Because he's progressed. He's super smart. He's super competitive. If you go back and watch him in the Missouri game, I mean, there's a minute left on the clock and he's got to go out there and lead a drive. And he looks like he's, sitting by the pool or something, just no. Now, when Rocket Sanders broke 12 tackles and got in the end zone, LaNorris is down almost on his knees, fired up, pumped up, but he doesn't get too high or low. He has kind of that perfect blend of fiery competitor versus, kind of rising to the next level just internally, right? But just a super smart, great kid. If you ever interact with him, just kind of a joy to be around, So again, just more boxes that he checks. And that's why they all loved him so much. And he earned the job in the preseason. I think everybody knew that it would take him some time. There'd be growing pains. We saw those in game 1 and onward, and he can still get better. There's still things he's got to work on, but the progression, I mean, it's a hockey stick growth curve for sure.
Yeah, I believe it for watching the last few weeks. All right, last one, because I've kept you long enough. What was it like being in Williams-Brice last week? I'm watching from TV.
Yeah.
They said there's like a literal small earthquake that
Yeah,
happens or something like that when Rocket Sanders scores that touchdown. What was that moment like?
It was, somebody pointed out, I think it was Rickson Lane on Twitter, the amount of game-winning touchdowns with like a minute or less left on the clock in the past 30 years at South Carolina. I think it was like 3. And so, number one, that doesn't happen a lot anyway.
Yeah.
But for me, and I remember a couple of those instances, I think, the emotional swing that it was, though, you had come back and scored, took the lead. Missouri's back on the field. You get them in 4th and 5. If you make a stop, game's probably over, right? Or it might have, I can't remember the time on the clock exactly. Game is, for all intents and purposes, very likely over. 4th and 5, Brady Cook drops a perfect pass to Luther Bird, and he catches it with one hand, gets in the end zone, right? So just all the emotions at that time for everybody in the stadium, for the team. Oh, no, it's happening again. You're going to lose Eli Drinkwitz again. It's going to be 4 straight for Beamer, 6 straight in the series overall. You were up 21-6, so it's like the LSU game. You've blown another double-digit lead, all the things. To go from that to the, absolute just I can't even come up with a word, just an explosion, of emotion going down and had a couple big plays, and then the final play to Rocket. That would have been thrilling on its own, but that emotional roller coaster leading up to it, I think, made it more special for everyone. And then just keeping this run going, so it was loud. People were fired up. There have been a lot of loud, big moments in Williams-Brice, but a lot of people who've been fans for a long time are ranking that top 5, top 10, way up there.
Yeah, I don't remember who was calling the game, but they said is there a calling it? You can feel the building shake. Did you feel that?
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
wow.
It was shaking. Yeah. Yeah. When you're up in the in
the press box, that's a little scary.
Yeah, and when you're up in the upper deck of Williams-Brice, and you'll feel a little shaken. So
yeah,
it's something. It's fun.
I've been in many a press box. I've never felt one shake. I'm sure that was unforgettable. Kind of hope that never happens to you again. That might freak me out a little bit. But Chris, thank you. I think you and I could probably sit here forever and talk football. You're easy to talk to. It's almost like you do radio for a living. Tell folks where to find your stuff.
Yeah, check us out, GamecockCentral.com. You can also hit us up, YouTube.com/GamecockCentral, and then 107.5 The Game, actually, if you want to listen to the radio, 107.5thegame.com. We're on 11 to noon for Monday through Friday during the week, but GamecockCentral.com, we're there all the time.
All right, he's Chris Clark of Gamecock Central. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 16. Hit the subscribe button, enable your notifications so you know when we go live with content or recorded content like this. But anyway, thank you for watching. God bless you. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 16, presented by BetOnline.